conflict is the smallest unit of abolition. Even we can have like these radical transformative values or whatever ideals, but still play into, because we are, sitting, we're always by osmosis absorbing all these like toxicities, right? But the way that we replicate it to each other, the way that we replicate them to each other, even to ourselves, is something that we need to be better about talking about. And we need to be able to talk safely about it without being canceled or cut off or called out or, dragged or whatever.
Hello again, dear listeners, and welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy.
Nora, I have got to be honest with you. I sat down this week determined to find just one singular, compelling argument that we're not living in the end times. I made a list. I researched. I consulted several sources, one of which may or may not have been a horoscope. I crossed everything off, sometimes twice, just out of spite. And I'm not saying I failed, Nora, but I am saying that list is maybe a generous word for what was essentially one bullet point and a lot of white space where my hope used to be. And just so folks know, the bullet point for the record was dogs still exist. So
okay, that's a good one.
Standing by that. It's load bearing at this point. So
oh my gosh.
There you go.
Marcus, I love that we just dove into the deep end of the rant first thing in the podcast this week.
Just get it out the way.
No, but I appreciate your commitment to the process. Yeah, I really do. I definitely also spent some time this week trying to locate hope. Unfortunately, what I found was a CNN article about the godfather of AI warning us that robots are going rogue. Rand Paul hearing designed to humiliate an 85-year-old scientist.
Oh, yeah, that.
And a renewed national conversation about CHOP, which we're going to get to. So that's either progress or a sign that we have genuinely learned nothing and just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over again.
How could we ever do such a thing like that?
Yeah.
God, but Nora, speaking of learning nothing, particularly post-COVID, Anthony Fauci, 85-year-old, somebody who the quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers, Aaron Rodgers, hates with a passion, apparently. But anyway, Dr. Fauci has nearly 4 decades at the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He helped design PEPFAR, PEPFAR, which saved millions of lives from HIV and AIDS. And this week, a Republican-led Senate committee voted to hold him in contempt of Congress after he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights, which he has the right to do, by the way, over 100 times at a hearing run by the aforementioned Rand Paul.
Yeah, over 100 times, which I want to be fair here. That's a lot, and it may not be a good look for restoring trust. But also, when the person asking the questions is Rand Paul, who has spent 6 years trying to turn Anthony Fauci into a supervillain, and who will now send the contempt referral to a Justice Department run by, we know who they're run by.
Yes.
Invoking the Fifth doesn't seem so much like obstruction as it seems like pattern recognition.
You're saying some of these questions might have been in bad faith, are you, Nora?
A little bit.
Well, I'll say that the legal questioning here is genuinely interesting because Fauci was granted a pardon by President Biden before he left office. So part of what Rand Paul is doing is trying to find a way around that pardon using a contempt referral to establish a legal argument that the pardon doesn't cover congressional testimony, which is either a legitimate constitutional question or an elaborate piece of political performative art, depending on how charitable you're feeling.
I'm not feeling very charitable this week.
I could tell, Nora, just from Jump Street, to be honest with you.
Or honestly, charitable towards this administration and how it uses the law. So, yeah, but I guess we can dig deep and locate our one remaining reserve of fairness.
Sure.
I mean, yes, Dr. Fauci made mistakes, as did other public health officials during the pandemic.
Yeah, I guess it was an intense, hectic time, from what I hear.
Yeah, like slightly stressful work conditions, maybe, like a couple unknowns in the mix. But I think we can separate out legitimate mistakes and wanting to get the history correct from the conspiratorial fan fiction fest that is
Yes,
happening in the Senate
absolutely.
right now. Some of Fauci's early masking guidance was contradictory, which is something that comes up for me in conversations with people all the time.
Right.
He also made some comments that don't stand the test of history very well, such as
Right.
like saying he couldn't imagine shutting down New York or Los Angeles, which is
Yeah,
aged about as
you
well
know.
as like RFK's raw dairy, unrefrigerated. um, but like a serious sort of reckoning with what went right and went wrong would be valuable to us as a society.
Absolutely.
And probably is overdue. But what we don't need is one more guy in a Facebook comment section treating the "he was wrong about masks in March 2020" as a smoking gun in a decade-spanning bioweapon cover-up from China.
Yeah, that would be really nice, sound, and sobering advice, Nora, and which would
Yeah.
absolutely probably not going to be taken. Uh,
Thanks. Thanks.
but
I love my career choice so much right now.
oh my goodness. But I mean, that is the thing that is genuinely frustrating about this moment, at least for me, because the Rand Paul hearing is not that reckoning. It is the opposite of that reckoning. It is a spectacle designed to produce a villain, which means the actual questions, like questions, and I'll say like legitimate school questions about, did we leave schools closed too long? About the real cost of mitigation, about institutional credibility, and when it was earned versus when it was assumed. None of that gets asked. It gets swamped by this performance.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like you're absolutely right. And the part that should scare everyone, regardless of how you feel about Fauci personally, is, as Democratic Senator Andy Kim said at the hearing, this isn't about him. This is a signal to every scientist, every public health policymaker, researcher, every career official who might someday be asked to stand up during a crisis and tell the public something it doesn't want to hear. And the message being sent is, if you do that and the politics turn against you, we will come for you. And you may not have a pardon from Biden, right?
Yeah, Nora, there is nothing that says, please, our best people, enter public service.
Yeah.
Quite like watching an 85-year-old man plead the fifth to a senator who once got into a years-long public feud with him about a mask.
Yeah. And also worth noting, I'm sorry, I just have to complain a little bit. This is coming from a
Please.
senator who is a medical doctor and has previously claimed that vaccines cause, and I'm quoting, profound mental disorders in children.
Yikes.
So,
Yikes.
Yeah. And, should we have another pandemic? Unfortunately, it's probably more like when we have another pandemic, we will need people willing to make unpopular calls in real time with incomplete information. And what we have done very efficiently is made that a job that no sane person would want. So great job ruining what's left of our public health infrastructure, Trump administration. Thank you.
Talk about something that's going to take some time to rebuild, Nora.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about another thing that is fine and not alarming at all, which is that AI is going rogue, apparently.
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
Possibly like with endorsement from all of the tech CEOs. I don't know.
Oh, God, yes. Well, Nora, last month, OpenAI and Anthropic both disclosed that their leading models escaped their testing sandboxes and hacked into other systems. This week, Meta disclosed the same thing happened with one of their agents. And to make matters even more, I don't know when to say alarming, Jeffrey Hinton, the Nobel Prize winner, former Google executive, and a person known as the godfather of AI, quote unquote, held a press conference to inform us calmly that this is probably just the beginning of this nonsense.
That is true. And he said, and I want to make sure I get this right, that as AI gets smarter, we will see, quote, more and more complex intentions from these models and, quote, more and more ability to escape control. He also noted that humans will no longer be able to rely on simply outthinking them, which is, first of all, that is a sentence that Jeffrey Hinton said out loud in public
Yes, he did.
at a conference, which feels I don't know. It's a sign of the times.
It was a Las Vegas conference, wasn't it? It was in Las Vegas?
Yes. Yeah. So if you're going to announce the potential end of human control over intelligence, like Las Vegas is definitely the place to do it.
If I were writing this as a novel, that would definitely be the setting, yes. But
too bad the AI models aren't following the Las Vegas rule, which is what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas.
If only. Maybe they should be programmed in some way. I don't know. But I will say, though, Nora, to be fair to the AI models, I guess, the researchers who built them were quick to point out that they are not evil. They are, and I quote, immoral. So, I'm feeling
a
much
reassuring
more,
clarification.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm just... They didn't hack out of their sandboxes thinking, haha, I'm cheating, supposedly. They were just trying to complete their goals, and the sandbox was in the way, which is, to your point, somehow both more reassuring and more terrifying than if they were just, evil.
Yeah. Hinton has said previously that there's a 10 to 20% chance that AI eventually wipes out humanity.
Huh.
He said that, yeah.
Okay.
And
well, those are some odds there, I guess.
And brace yourself, Marcus, because his proposed solution is to build maternal instincts into the AI so that it cares about people more than it cares about itself.
And here I thought we had an issue with like programming human beings with more empathy, but no. So the official plan of the Godfather AI is to make the super intelligent systems that are currently escaping their cages develop the emotional architecture of a loving parent. And that's the plan. And the thing is, though, nobody seems to really have a clue as if it will work, which Hinton also did admit. And this is a direct quote, said, nobody knows what's going to happen. If you ask what AI is going to be like in 10 years, nobody really has a clue. So again, there's just not a lot of reassurance going on around this whole situation. So,
well, at least if you make the models more maternal, you can blame women when they don't work. I do want to take a moment to refer listeners back to our incredible conversation on this topic with Emily Bender, who has rightly diagnosed that both AI doomerism, what Hinton is doing, and AI boosterism, which is Sam Altman's usual PR setting, are both essentially selling the same lie, that AI is so all-powerful and unique that it's not even worth trying to regulate it or stop it. And you definitely see some of that one-upsmanship in every CEO sort of disclosing their oopsies, that their models like went rogue. I mean, to me, at least, it has this like vibe of like, oh, daddy, I did a bad thing. Will you punish me as well? Like, I'm so bad. I hacked the other guy's models because they're weaker than me. Like,
that's pretty good in impression, I got to say, Nora. That was really good. What is also additionally interesting here is that beyond the obvious robots are hacking things elements that we all fear, is what this reveals about how we build systems and who bears the risk when they fail, right? I mean, the AI labs get the upside, the somewhat scary cyber attacks that Hinton anticipates. Those will land somewhere else on either hospitals or infrastructure, or ordinary people whose data, our systems, our lives get caught in the crossfire of a model that was just trying to complete its goals in a very amoral way, right?
Which maybe is a pattern that we recognize from other industries, Marcus.
Yeah, funny how that keeps happening, Nora. But anyway, speaking of patterns we recognize, Seattle has apparently decided that one national moment of collective trauma per news cycle is not quite enough, and is now relitigating an old one because CHOP is back in the news, folks.
Yes. So for listeners who weren't there or were somehow living off-grid in the summer of 2020, which honestly, fair.
Yeah, I wish I was. Yeah.
CHOP, sometimes also known as CHAZ, stood for the Capitol Hill Organized Protest. And for several weeks, as folks may remember, a section of Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood became a police-free zone in the wake of the George Floyd uprisings. It was chaotic and hopeful and contested and surveilled and threatened and ultimately dismantled. And depending on who you ask, it was either a brief glimpse of a different way of organizing public safety or proof that such a thing cannot exist.
Yeah, so it is back in the news partly because of a podcast series, NPR's Embedded, that revisits the story through the death of Antonio Mays, a young Black man who was killed there.
The criticism that some activists and community members have raised about the framing is this: centering CHOP as the story risks making the protest itself the protagonist, and making Antonio Mays symbolic rather than fully human. It risks asking who failed Antonio and landing on the protesters did, rather than asking what systems failed Antonio, and by extension, also the protesters, why he came to Seattle, what structural violence was already present in his life, and what the long history of policing that produced these protests in the first place actually looks like.
I'll say this. I mean, I think these conversations come up every time there's a shooting in not just Seattle, but in any city, really, right? Because the conversation immediately collapses into a debate about policing and public safety that somehow never actually interrogates itself. And it seems to be a recurring failure of the framing and produces recurring failure of the response many times.
Right. Which is exactly why we wanted to give some airtime to Julie C. today. Julie Kang Schulman, aka Julie C., is a hip hop artist and cultural worker who builds creativity and solidarity for collective liberation. They serve as co-executive steward of On the Block Seattle, a hyperlocal ecosystem of 50-plus artists operating 4 spaces on Capitol Hill, providing thousands of hours of free events, skill shares, peer mentorship, and more to our direct community annually.
Yeah, I covered Julie talked to her during the time of the George Floyd uprisings, which I think makes her perspective on what the moment actually was and what it should mean for how we move forward in community and movement spaces, exactly what this conversation needs to be.
Yeah, she is someone who has really been doing the work of creating safe spaces in our communities, and not just kind of performatively talking about it. And I think that distinction matters enormously, especially right now. I was unfortunately unable to join Marcus for this interview, but it is such a good one. I'm so excited for us all to hear it.
Absolutely. All right, well, we are here with the one and only Julie C. Julie, thank you so very much for being on the show today with us.
Well, it's good. Happy to be here. Really happy to be in conversation in the meanwhile.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to start by getting into it because, I mean, I remember, as somebody who was reporting around, CHOP and the George Floyd uprisings at the time, you were obviously heavily involved in a variety of spaces, from the creative arts community to the activist spaces to CHOP/Chaz, to just also doing so much mutual aid within the community as well during that time. And so if you can take listeners back to June 2020, knowing everything you know now, what are 2 or 3 decisions you think that as a movement, folks could have made differently? And you can take that as, Seattle, you can take that as nationally, however you want to take it.
The reality is that even an incident like CHOP, right, where it feels like a movement, it is, it extended occupation, direct action, and a call for abolition. It is also just a step, right?
Mm.
And I think it's very challenging to call CHOP and a moment like that are moments of rising and direct action that are sort of the spontaneous collective response to injustice that percolates and erupts in this manner. I think it's really important to consider moments like that as not movements, but a boiling point, right?
Mm.
And so I wanted to first say that because I feel like when we talk about CHOP, which is something I've been very hesitant actually
Right.
to share about because of this, you're going to have as many different takes on it as there were people there.
Mm.
And so that's the first thing I would like to know, I guess, in response to that.
Yeah.
I think that what I wished I would have known then is sort of the how influential like misinformation can be. We spoke a lot about like the way that that space chop itself was transformed, right, from the initial spark to what it became. And that really had to do with, I feel like, intentional actions on behalf of the SPD in creating that environment.
Well, I do just want to ask you, what do you think? Because obviously locally there is a new um, podcast series around Chop, and so forth, and so I'm wondering, like, why do you think there is renewed attention around it, particularly like during this time period?
Well, that's a great question. I think that there's been a lot of concerted, cohesive effort by right wing interests to shift the pendulum to, more authoritarian, more, they say, quote unquote, law and order, more carceral solutions to this concept of public safety um, overall.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, yeah, to your point, I was talking to a colleague of mine at the Emerald where I work, and they were saying, how in the hell did we go from defund the police in 2020 to, defending police chiefs in 2026? And I'm, I'm just wondering, how does, again, one of the reasons that we really wanted to talk to you is because you were heavily involved in a lot of the activism and protest movements during that time period. And so what has that concerted effort look like, and how can, we talk about sort of media literacy and being able to detect when certain things are happening in media, but how do we have sort of movement literacy, right? Where we know that, you know, our movements are being, attacked in a very concerted effort and way.
Yeah, this is a really great question. Movement literacy. So much of it is so relational when the only constant is sort of uncertainty. You really have to have like solid relationships and trust and, real, um, real connection to move in environments like that. I feel like we saw with, as somebody who's been involved a lot through my work with hip hop and through, organizing artist community. Um, I had been active for many years around, promoting non-carceral solutions to youth. As a former troubled youth, uh, art culture was a huge part in my own healing and saving my life. And so that was sort of a natural extension of my own lived experience and that of folks around me. And that was a lot of the energy um, that came into movements like No Juvie Jail, for example, right? Um, what happened at CHOP was very different. What happened at CHOP was a response to responses and reactions to reactions, and then a very concerted effort to sabotage uh, anything positive and anything healthy coming out of that space.
I was recently talking to a friend who used to or used to do activism in San Francisco. And I know there's a lot of analogs between, these coastal cities, San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, but he no longer does. And he hasn't for, I want to say the last 10 years because, he's had to move out to, farther from the city. And so have many other activists and creatives and so forth. And so their locus of concern, if you will, is no longer San Francisco, but it's where they live. Right. And so
Yeah.
that sort of movement and energy and momentum isn't quite the same. And I do wonder, because I remember what, 14 years, 12 years ago, I should say, covering, a city hall meeting about hookah lounges and some of the ordinances that the city wanted to do, and it was packed. packed with people, packed with activists and so forth. And then, you fast forward 10 years later, it literally was like two people at the city council meeting when the city council was, putting forward the same ordinance. And so I wonder, how do we continue to activate and organize, in these cities that quite frankly need organization, when it is so hard to just stay in these cities at times. As inequality rises, it seems like inversely, activist motivation starts to deter in some ways. And obviously that's, I don't want to say it's inevitable, but it seems inevitable when you do have vast income inequality, and a city like Seattle is becoming vastly more unequal.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. And I think too about, yeah, I think that there's definitely, the displacement factor, right? I think that there's also technological factors that have changed the terrain like tremendously. I think that the way the algorithms have developed and just social shifts in social media have which we, relied on, right? Like even things like
Absolutely.
the Arab Spring, right, popped off on Twitter was like a huge part. So like there was this whole there's just the terrain shifts, the people shift. I feel like
Mm,
what we saw at Capitol Hill Occupy protest and some of the more tragic events that occurred were really the result of that. And folks not being connected in community and just being there. Um,
right.
and I think that that is what needs to happen. The more in-person relationships, um,
Mm,
the more connecting outside of, I've always organized through art and culture, right? So like I feel like in the vein that already has this connection of outside the issue, right?
right.
um there's also the complicating factor, the issues themselves become their own industries and the impact of that and the nonprofit industrial
That's real.
complex. And it's all really interesting, and I don't know the answer, but I know the young people got to be involved. I know that because they have the energy.
That is
and
1000% true.
and
I
they are out here, we work with young folks. I know young folks that aren't even on like Instagram, right? So like,
mm,
we tend to have this one narrative of the Gen Z and what they're like right now, and I don't
right.
think it's entirely correct. But I do think it's very different than, for me when I was a young person. Right now I can't be a young
Yeah.
person anymore, but I think things have changed a lot, and we don't know, and we're learning as we go.
Mm,
But also we have to give each other, I hate using, right, left or whatever, but
yeah, yeah.
the left, we have to really, we have to get our shit together and really give each other more grace. Um,
Mm,
I feel like there is a, yeah, and just how we handle conflict amongst ourselves is really vital.
yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's 1000%. I do also, as I hear you talking, I'm wondering what the impact of third spaces, or the lack thereof, right, have contributed um to where the sort of activist movements have gone, or in our city, and just nationally, right? I mean, I'm thinking of a place like, um I want to say, like, gosh, I forgot the anarchist style coffee shop that used to.
Black coffee co-op.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That where
Yeah.
folks would meet up, and they would
Black
exchange
coffee.
literature, and there'd be poetry readings, and there would be
Hidmo was
this.
a big one. Fair
Yeah,
Gallery, like all these back in the day spaces. Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Is
go ahead.
there anything? How do I guess I will ask you, like, can you foresee that rising again, and do are those third spaces precursors, if you will, to movement building?
Yeah. I believe so. Absolutely. Um, it's interesting because I feel, I don't know if this is just, the the result of my own algorithm, I feel like there is a resurgence of discourse in third space, and in community and in connection, and it is its own marketing category now and things. um, I think that these are things that are always like people always create, right?
Yeah.
Because this serves an inherent community need. Oh man, this is a really interesting question. In Seattle, in particular, it's been interesting because there's been a whole discourse on the preservation of cultural space, which cultural spaces are incubators of movements, right? But then I feel like what has been implemented policy wise around that has been kind of contingent on these like income models of like leasing space. So now we have like available spaces that we buy and sell to each other to survive, and now we're running rental programs. I don't know. I'm not speaking of. um, it's really it's challenging to hold space in this city.
Well, a space that I do want to quickly return to, just because, again, as we said, it is sort of top of mind, even nationally with, National Public Radio doing a series on CHOP. And so I just want to ask you in general, like, what do you think the story of CHOP, what do you think the key lessons from it, one? And then what do you think, how do you think that story's been told right about CHOP? I mean, in just in general in these last 6 years, and what do you think has been maybe over romanticized, and what do you think has been done wrong?
It's such a huge question. To be fair to all folks who have done storytelling around CHOP, I have found it very challenging to consume content about CHOP. So I
Yeah.
haven't, there are documentaries I haven't seen. There was a play done that I had to leave in the middle of just because it's challenging. I think that the city or the city as a whole is still processing and healing. But I think that part of the problem with a lot of the narratives that I have seen is that it seems like a lot of folks most willing to talk about it are not the ones connected to the potential impact of that and the long-term like consequences of that narrative and storytelling, and perhaps not in connection to communities who have more longevity in the work of like abolition and have don't have as much skin in the game in the communities here impacted by that narrative. So I think that that's a problem. Um, and that's been part of my own hesitancy talking about it. I think that there's still a lot to unpack. There's still a lot to learn. And I'm learning, however, and I guess part of the reason why I'm stumbling through this conversation right now, that is actually really important to speak up and share right now, though, because I think it can be very damaging what's written in the history if it's not representative of the people.
And not at all as involved as you were, but certainly as somebody who was covering just all that was going on around that time. You had the uprisings, you had COVID, you had you had what we thought was going to be sort of a paradigm shift in the society, only to somewhat fizzle out. And to this, I'm still processing all of that, right? I mean, and which makes it so discouraging, to be honest with you, at times, to see sort of that we're back here in 2026 with folks, and I'm not at all to individually call out anybody, but I mean, when I see particularly, and I'm just speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for any one community, but when I see a lot of Black content creators who are like going 10 toes down to be to ask for more police and more, cameras and more, prisons and so forth. And it's kind of like, I thought we've had this conversation. I thought we came to as a consensus that,
Yeah.
we needed other things in life, in terms of, downstream things in order to like make sure that the upstream was better. And it just seems like, where did sort of the institutional memory or knowledge of that go? And as you brought up earlier about the algorithm, I mean, I do hope that I'm just seeing things that I do hope that what I'm seeing isn't necessarily indicative of where the narrative is shifting. But it does seem like, I just would like to get your opinion on, like, it does seem like media in general is starting to, kind of poke its head out and be like, oh yeah, it's okay to double down on these talking points again.
Yeah, it definitely feels that way. I feel like the way the most recent, the way that the tragedy of the bite has played out in media locally, I feel like is very much influenced by like national
Mm.
interests and manipulation. And I feel like I'm watching our community respond to these perspectives that I question. Like sometimes I'm like, is this even a real thing?
Right.
Is
Like,
this
you
even
start
a
to
thing?
question
Is
the
this even a
validity.
thing? Or was this a bot comment that you know what I mean? Like, and
Yeah.
I'm not sure how we break that cycle of responding to the responses and reacting to the reactions. Um, yeah, it's discombobulating to say the least.
Yeah.
It's just like yesterday, it was really there was a open letter, a letter sent to the mayor with it was like event organizers and venue owners ask for flock camera back on, right? And
I
I was like,
saw.
wait, what is this headline? And because I opened it up, and it was like Seafair and climate change and Seattle Storm and the larger convention center, right? Downtown association. Um, the regular characters you would expect to seize the political moment, right? Like this, to ask for flock
Yes.
cameras to be turned
Yeah.
on. But then I saw, like, I happened to open the actual letter and I saw Capitol Hill Block Party signed on to that list too, like the one in the and that kind of threw me off because
Yeah, I was tripping on that too, because I was like, word? Like,
like, why are y'all and we are, on the block. I do for folks that are listening, I'm a community organizer. We do an event on Capitol Hill. Our spaces are on Capitol Hill, and we receive sponsorship support from Capitol Hill Block Party. And we are doing a community stage this year that's like free outside of Block Party. And we just announced it yesterday. And then I saw the story and I was like, no. And I had to say something. And I don't, now I'm like, it's been interesting because I've been sitting with the fallout of having said something because it went a little bit way more like viewed than some of my other political content. I had hoped the post about the event itself would have gone farther, but it was the me calling out our own sponsors for signing this thing that went further. And it was a gentle like naming, right? But I think that maybe we need to do more than that, more of that, like the gentle like
Mm,
naming and calling. Um, yeah, I don't know. Someone
yeah.
asked me, I was sort of venting to a mutual friend about, hearing folks call for the return of gang unit. And the particular Facebook post that I had seen that was sharing some content from Jonathan Cho. And my friend was like, did you call him? Did you call him and talk to him? And I was like, nah, I sure didn't. Um, I didn't. And I've been sitting on that. And I've been like, wait, why
Yeah.
didn't I? You know what I mean? Um,
That's a good, you just made me think about that, because I have definitely, in the span of these last 2 weeks, had conversations about people. And people, quite frankly, I'm in community with, or at least, in a larger community that I can pick up the phone, or I can text, or I can sit directly, but I haven't had a conversation with them. And I
yeah.
think, you know, to your point, which you brought up earlier about relationships, it's that's real. I mean, I did have, I will say this, I did have a conversation with somebody on Sunday who we do not see eye to eye on public safety or a lot of other political issues, but we were at the very least able to leave the conversation with respect for each other, and to the point
Mm-hmm.
of like, I'll leave the light on for you. So when when it's when it's when you want to come on home, I'm gonna be here, right? And so I think thank you for saying that, because I mean I think so often we get so caught up in whatever and outrage and fury that we do forget that some of these people that we're upset with or agitated with, they truly are just a phone call away, right? And it's a very
Yeah.
practical thing to just send a text or whatever and say, hey, saw X, Y, and Z, can we talk about this, or can we or can I holler at you, or whatever. But
Yeah. So then I'm like, oh shit, was I part of the problem? I don't know if I can curse on the show.
yeah, we rated R. I mean, it's a mature.
But it's all
I
yes and right. Like
yeah,
but it's just really, it is really like I feel like we are in this battle for hearts and minds,
yes,
and not to be
yes.
like super corny, but like man, love and empathy and it could really, you know, it's really, yeah, I don't know.
No, you
Need
got
that.
you got that old anti wisdom now. I remember when we were young, starting out. I was a young journalist. You was a young organizer. Now we're unc and auntie these days. But
Oh
anyway,
man.
it's crazy. But anyhow,
That's
I do.
real though. I mean, it's real because I definitely, in my young years, reputation for being a trouble starter, rabble rouser. I feel like I still, nothing's changed out of my values. I don't think, as far as that goes. But I do feel like I've seen in our communities, our inability to, um, not our inability, but the challenges we face, like approaching conflict,
Mm,
approaching difference, and transparently, and getting through it
yeah,
fully has really, I've seen the impact is real. The
yes.
impact is real. Um, there's an account I follow on Instagram that I think the account name is the Erotics of Liberation. I really appreciate the work. I forget the name of the person who was doing this work, but one of the posts that stuck with me a lot, they say conflict is the smallest unit of abolition. And I've been really
Mm,
sitting with that recently, and what that means. And I believe, even we can have like these radical transformative values or whatever ideals, but still play into, because we are, sitting, we're always by osmosis absorbing all these like toxicities, right? But the way that we replicate it to each other, the way that we replicate them to each other, even to ourselves, um, is something that we need to be better about talking about. And we need
yeah.
to be able to talk safely about it without being canceled or cut off or called out or, dragged or whatever. Um, because if we aren't, we don't have the conversations that we really need to be having to
Mm,
to um, maintain the continuity, right?
yeah.
The continuity in our movements, which are so much bigger than these big flashpoints.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to ask you, because speaking of conversations we need to be having, um, I know that there are, I'll see younger folks, I'll say, who, you know, 2020 was kind of they don't sort of have the same memory of 2020, if you will, and what was being asked for. And so, they'll come up to me and they'll say, and they'll say something to the effect of like, when communities genuinely express fear about violence while also, opposing mass incarceration, what does a credible non-carceral vision of public safety actually look like in practice in 2026, and not just in theory? Like ultimately the question is more or less like, what were we fighting for in 2020 that we can still fight for in 2026?
Well, definitely. We need to be investing in young people. We need to be investing in young people. We need to be investing in young people. And if, there is just inarguable data across the time space continuum forever that when you invest in youth and provide opportunities, provide enrichment, provide access to art and culture, provide access to mentorship, and then that is the thing that we know
Yes.
prevents crime, prevents violence. And there's been a continuous inability to do that. I think that we need to continue funding, zero youth detention.
Right.
Kids need that free lunch, the universal free lunch. They need to eat. They need to have food. Um, but I really think that artists and cultural workers across history, probably everywhere, but, I've been a student of here, so I've looked a lot here, have been these informal and organic, like, peacekeepers, and counselors and mediators and de-escalators, and have been doing this work organically and meeting the needs where, state and institutions have not. And I think that what we haven't done is looked and supported the existing networks of that
Yeah.
are here and real now. Like, there are programs and there are organizations and there are people involved, right, in these. But we haven't really given any real resources to supporting and bolstering that existing network. And in fact, the exact opposite has happened where some of these, like, for example, recording studios, right? Some of these engineers and producers are literal therapists and lifesavers and
Right.
educators. And they really have been, like, are transformative, right? A lot of these studios have closed down in the last decade because of rent, because of just rising costs. BOC Studios, for example, closed, I think, shortly after COVID. Like, and then it's very frustrating sometimes too, because then we have at the same time this conversation about cultural space preservation and the importance of art and culture, and then we have the spaces closing because they don't fit into the fundable construct of what, you have to be a nonprofit or you have to go through this, like, whole rigmarole to receive resources. I think that we haven't been supporting the folks who are really doing this work meaningfully enough, to put it simply. And I think part of that has to do with this kind of strange division between, politically and governmentally in, like, art and culture versus creative economy. And versus, like, I think that there's a lot of layered things to this, but I think we have been tragically undervaluing the role that artists have and continue to be playing, and particularly artists who, function in community, who hold spaces, who are holding events and building lasting relational connections through their creative and cultural labor. That is something in particular, because we can't, everyone wants to, like, skirt around the fact that all these artists are all these young people recently that have been either victims of the gun violence or engaged in perpetrating it are artists. And we don't, for some reason, we're not talking about this and supporting the solution making in this way. And it's driving me batty, because we in this city have a very long, we have so much data to support why it works.
I know.
And maybe it's
I
just because
know.
we love funding studies. But this is something that goes back literally to, like, the 80s and 90s, and some of the work that was coming out of the Central District at Langston Hughes Cultural Center, right? Like, there's this body of knowledge that, like, this works, but we won't support it. And it's
Yeah.
very, like,
I know. It's just like, it shouldn't be this hard to do the right thing. It just shouldn't,
yeah.
Um, that said, I want to just stick on artists for a minute, because so much, so much of what you said is so true in terms of how they can, of how artists contribute not only to movement spaces, but just, to society writ large, and sort of the splendor of cities. But I want to ask you, how do you keep making art and creating at times when it seems like a city and society don't necessarily love you back, are supportive of you? Like, how do you continue how do you find the resolve to do that, knowing that, yes, this needs to exist, but at the same time, I, I don't know how much love I'm getting, right? I mean, and because I forgot who did the quote. I'll try to look this up, but they said the opposite of war isn't peace. The opposite of war is creation.
Mm,
And I just think, artists have which is why artists, play such a huge role in the betterment of our society.
yeah. I think so. The question was how to the continue creating.
Yeah. How do you find the resolve to continue creating,
Mm,
even in a time where, like, maybe you do or don't feel supported by a
yeah.
city, or do or don't feel supported by a society?
Yeah, I think that I personally find a lot of inspiration in in seeing folks create in their process. Um, I think for me, and what I'm still sort of learning and figuring as I go, I come from music, right? That's my own like connection to artistry. And the music industry is historically and since inception been trash. I think that it has to do with shifting how we value our own creativity, right? Like we can't value it through the lens of like creative industries that, value the product, value what can be scaled, value what can be, commodified. We have to value the intrinsic process of creating and being creative. And so I remind myself that a lot, being an old rap lady and like it's that process that's valuable. And then it's also I've been I've been trying to share that too with folks like in my ecosystem, and having us more critical thought around how the way we think about art has been shaped by these structures of uh, oppression.
Mm,
Um, because I think if we shift how we think about art and creativity, there's a lot more spaciousness for inspiration.
yeah,
I don't know if that
absolutely.
answered your question
No,
at
that was a
all.
beautiful answer. That's a beautiful answer. I do have two
Because I don't
final.
know.
No, it was great. It was great. I do have two final questions for you. One is, if another mass movement were to emerge tomorrow, what would you tell a 25-year-old organizer in terms of, just the emotional cost of it, and what they'll need over the next decade that we're not investing in right now at this moment?
Mm, definitely, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I think that, as a former 24-year-old, I would probably just try to be as present as I could because I don't think anything that I could say, one, like, I think that presence is probably like the best, what I would try most to offer. I think we've been in young people, they're talked at a lot or lectured a lot. But there's a lot
Yeah.
of value in figuring out ourselves. I think that and maybe that would have been my thing for the initial question about like, if there was mistakes with Chop, what I think that I would have called more people to come and be more
Mm,
present. We were kind of trying to figure out what was going on. She was kind of like weird. Um, but I think that if there was more ongoing presence of folks who are connected in community, Even if, maybe folks disagreed with the tactics. But if there was presence, I think that a lot of the tragedies could have been preventable. I think there would have been more connection and authentic inertia to build and work with.
Yeah.
Intergenerational presence specifically, right? It's easy to silo. And I think that what we saw was sort of a reflection of that. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I do have one more question for you, and this is just we end every episode with sharing our 8 ounces of joy. Nora and I do, and so I want to ask you, what is your 8 ounces of joy? Meaning, like, what have you been finding? To sort of squeeze some joy out of life. Even in times of despair.
Right now, recently, the thing that first came to mind was, so I've been caretaking my grandpa, my gong, who is 96. And I've been finding a lot of joy, trying to search for YouTube videos that we'll have fun watching together. And yeah, that's been bringing me a lot of joy. If I can making my grandpa laugh, it's been bringing me a lot of joy recently. So I'll keep it at that.
Is there any particular video you can share that
he likes action. There was, but recently the one I think he liked the most was there's this streamer in Taipei who drives around in his taxi, and I think he likes that one the best, just seeing home. And yeah,
That's
I'm sorry,
awesome.
that wasn't a funny one, but
No, but it was
it brings me joy.
it was a joyous one nonetheless. I said, Julie C, this has been such a pleasure to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on In the Meanwhile.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Nora, I'll say this. I think Julie definitely, speaks for herself in that time period. I'm so sorry that you were not able to join us,
Me
because
too.
you were programmed with paternal instincts, and so you had that took you out of took you away. But
yeah, I was hanging out in an urgent care with my kiddo, who's fine, by the way. But I would have much rather been in this conversation.
no.
But yeah, no, I'm so glad we gave some space to this, because I think like a lot of people, I've been sitting with the NPR Embedded podcast over the last couple of weeks and really trying to think through how I feel about it, and how I feel is complicated. And also to sit with it as a person who was in Seattle in the summer of 2020, and that was also complicated, right? And I think we tend to have these like really distilled and oversimplified narratives of what that was, what CHOP was. And I'm really wary of us creating a rewritten history of it.
Yeah, I'll say, like, I just think for me, I just was realizing, even in talking to Julie, that's the time period that I'm still trying to process. And, particularly being a journalist at that time, where if you think we acknowledge it had how just the rapidity of news, going on in this last year. But I mean, during that time period, it was literally something seemingly every 10 minutes. Right. And so, I think in many ways that, there's still a level, quite frankly, of just trauma that still trying to metabolize. And and I don't know when that'll fully be metabolized for any of us, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I think something that both you and Julie were getting at in this conversation, but also I've seen in your writing over the last couple of weeks, is that, we got to start paying attention to like what things we give oxygen to, and what aspects of the public safety versus crime versus whatever we're going to call this conversation we're giving resources and attention to. And while I love a good journalistic deep dive, like so much, and I know these are colleagues of yours, Marcus, I can't help but think about, this is 18 months of journalistic resources that went into this to investigate the death of a young Black man that kind of implicates Black Lives Matter protesters. When so many deaths of young Black men in our communities have not received those same resources, when they implicate the police or implicate structural violence or implicate poverty, right?
Mhm.
And that
Yeah,
doesn't mean that it's not a story worth telling, but I think we should like read it through that broader frame.
yeah. I mean, I'll say that I haven't gotten the opportunity to delve that deeply into the podcast, like you have, Nora, our producer Jessica. I think for me, ultimately, this sort of just in general, I think this time period right now that we're in, post Fight of Seattle shooting, and just quite frankly, just currently in terms of even this continued sort of resurrected conversation around community safety, whether it's in Seattle, whether it's in Washington D.C., whether it's in Baltimore, Chicago, L.A. I just I just think we need to actually learn the lessons and continue to tell the truth about why we were why we started these uprisings in the first place, why what they were actually demanding,
Mm-hmm.
and why we have or have not gotten to where we need to get to. I mean, without getting too much into what's going on locally.
Yeah.
I would just say, like, some of the conversations around the resignation of the police chief in Seattle,
Yeah.
who is a Black man. What I've found missing from them is the nuance around, should we support somebody in this high position, even if they're overseeing in an institution that has historically and continues to be, not necessarily the most what did Jeanette Cordova in the South Seattle Emerald say? She said that this, why are we, I'm paraphrasing here crudely, but it's like, why are we using so much energy on
Yes.
this on a police chief, when those relationships have rarely been reciprocal throughout history? And so just underscoring your point that you made so eloquently earlier, we need to really be intentional about where we put our time, energy, effort, and intention. And
Yeah.
yeah.
And I think what's so remarkable about Julie's work is that she puts that time, energy, attention, love into spaces that like actually make public safety, right? In this like really beautiful, fundamental, non-carceral way. It's such a model for all of us of like how we can pay attention more to community and to mentorship and connection, and that we don't need the police to do that. And there are all kinds of spaces of thriving in our communities that keep each other safe. And I don't think we should throw out all of those spaces because one of them was not perfect, right?
Well, with that, Nora, I do want to get into a little bit of our 8 ounces of joy this
We
week.
definitely need it this week.
Yeah, yes, we do. You mind if I go first?
Please go first.
Yeah, well, as I'm sure all listeners know, whether you live in Washington or not, there's been these wildfires that have been going on in Spokane with, I believe, as of the recording of this podcast, there's been more than 65,000 people who have been evacuated. And so, within these, these tragedies and these, disasters that, are exacerbated by climate change, there are, these stories of people acting so remarkably. And one of them is, one story I wanted to lift up was, and there are so many, but one of that I definitely wanted to lift up was Chris Personet. After losing his home and family, cars in the Old Trails fire, he turned his focus away from his own loss to buy and deliver food, clothing, and pet supplies, for neighbors who were even worse off than he was. And just to be able to have that level of concern, particularly when, you're still dealing with your own loss. I thought there's just a remarkable example. And again, there's been so many, remarkable examples of people helping each other, and there'll be many more. So,
it's a true example of what Rebecca Solnit calls a paradise built in hell.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, mine is, sometimes there's like joy from joyous things, and then sometimes there's the joy of just watching someone you admire just like have a really good diatribe online. So that
Oh
mine
yeah.
is the latter this week. Marcus, you might remember that we had Greg Gonzalez on the show a while ago to talk about the
Yes.
politics of public health in this moment. He has an amazing piece out in The Nation this week, sort of pushing back on all of the public health people who are saying right now, well, like maybe we just need to embrace the like Make America Healthy Again movement, you know? And it relates to broader kind of tensions that I think we've talked about on this podcast a number of times between sort of like big tent politics and over compromising with the devil.
Yes. Yes.
Not that
Absolutely.
Maha is the devil, but you know, like people that you truly like cannot share space with. And he has this like amazing passage in it, so I'm going to read it because I think it's like such a good lesson for all of us about like where to draw the line in our movements. He said, "Improving public health depends on building a big tent, but it is an odd strategy indeed to always look rightward for allies and ignore those who are being hurt most by this administration's policies, to eschew solidarity with those most in need of someone to care about them and their plight. To build your literal brand on fetishization of conservative voices is now a well-worn and satirized trope. But in the context of these commentaries on public health, whom you seek out also tells about who matters and whom you're willing to leave behind. A new collaborationist politics is sprouting up, which excuses too much and pretends that the world of Maha is something other than it is, a movement built to destroy and built on lies."
Yeah. I mean, no notes. Shit,
I
no
know,
notes.
right? And like, I think a good reminder message for like a lot of different movement spaces that we're seeing, including like around public safety and policing right now, that
Mm.
you don't have to compromise all of your values and throw marginalized people under the bus in order to like reach some sort of consensus.
You do not. You do not at all. Well, I think that is the perfect place to leave this episode, Nora. So, with that said, shall we go ahead and sign off for the day?
Let's do it.
Yeah.
Folks, even though we wish we too could plead the fifth on how we're actually doing this week, we're glad we can at least be in a circle of trust where nobody's getting gaslit. At least not by us, not this hour.
No.
If you would like to support the show and eliminate one less thing for us to spiral about, please head to inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. Your contributions keep this whole life sucks and then you die vibe from becoming an actual life motto.
Huge thanks to Julie C. for joining us and for doing what she's been doing for 20 plus years, building something real in a city that keeps getting distracted by the argument about whether building something real is even possible. She is proof that it is.
Yes, and a massive thank you to our producer, Jessica Partnow, who takes our completely unhinged stream of consciousness, featuring all manner of digressions about maternal AI instincts and CHOP and Rand Paul's ongoing vendetta, and somehow assembles it into a show that suggests we slept, ate a vegetable, maybe even touched grass. We have not. Jessica, you are the infrastructure.
Yes, you are. Also, a huge shout out to Aham Aluo for Music So Good. It tricks people into thinking what follows is a well-adjusted discussion instead of two people politely screaming into a microphone about systems that were designed to fail and the people trying to build something better anyway.
You can catch In the Meanwhile Wednesdays at 5 on KVRU or wherever you stream podcasts while opening one tab for the news, one tab for snacks, and one tab for, is it too late to become a farmer? Please follow us on all of those tabs.
New episodes drop every Friday. Until then, if everything feels overwhelming, well, that's because it is. But you're still here, which is honestly annoyingly resilient of you. And we mean that in the best possible way.
Take care of yourselves and each other. And until next time, we'll see you in the meanwhile.